Okay, folks, so now that we've explored building our own functions, I want to take a minute for us to clean up our files before we move ahead and start working with other people's functions and other people's files, specifically the Google Visualization Library. So one of the things that we've been talking about since the beginning of the course is how, ideally what we want to have is we want to have the content, the structure, and the style of our file and the interactivity all separated from one another, right? We don't want to have them all kind of mixed up together. So that's why we created CSS classes and applied classes to our divs as opposed to putting style specifications right on those divs. Likewise, we have a separate section with JavaScript, but even so, I actually right now have everything in one file, right? So this is actually not ideal. What I want to do instead, and what will generally be our practice from here on out, is we're not only going to keep these separated by tags, we're actually going to keep them separated by files. So to show an example of how this works, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take all of my JavaScript code. So I'm highlighting everything between my script tags. Okay, absolutely everything. Okay, I'm going to cut it from this file. I know, might seem kind of intense. I'm going to create a new JavaScript file. The JavaScript template just puts a comment in the top here. And I'm going to just paste everything in, okay? So exactly as it was before, just paste it in. You can see things are a bit indented here, so I'm going to once again go to source and format, and it's going to kind of justify things for me. So one thing is now that it's not inside script tags, I don't have everything pushed so far to the right. And I'm going to be sure to save this. I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save it into, I'm going to choose local file system here. You can ignore the project thing. I'm going to save it right into my new, I'm going to save it right into my Git folder. Okay. Conventionally, we call this scripts.js. It's where we put all of our JavaScript. And we can make changes to that. But for now, we'll start with scripts.js. Now, when I save this, we will notice, of course, obviously, I have now deleted all of the scripts from my page. So if I reload my page, nothing happens, right? This effect is very similar to what happened when I had a bunch of code and then wrapped it in a function. I had to explicitly call that function in order for it to be executed. Similarly, I can have that scripts page, but unless I explicitly load it into my HTML file, nothing's going to happen. So it turns out that actually images are not the only tags that can have a source property. Likewise, I can have a source property on a script tag. And you'll see that actually it brings up a nice little window here. I could just type this in. The window isn't important. And so here I can just have a tag that says script source scripts.js. Now I actually also want to pass another parameter here, and it's called type, and it's going to be text/JavaScript. It's important that you get JavaScript and not JScript. They're not the same thing. And this is just, again, a little bit of extra metadata for the computer to know, okay, right, I should interpret this thing as JavaScript, right? So file extensions and these type parameters are what help the computer be like, oh, right, that's how I should, that's the translation mechanism I should use. Now, if I return, you can see all of my code is functioning back on the page again. So what I've done is we call this refactoring, okay? And the idea is basically just, as we said from the beginning, we want to have our JavaScript in one place, we want to have our CSS in another place, we want to have our HTML in another place, we want to have all of them separated. And eventually we're actually going to take our content, right, our data, which in this case is our articles list, we're actually going to take that out and put it in a separate file for the most part. So same thing I want to do with my CSS, right? I'm going to actually copy everything between my style tags. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to create a new file, a new CSS. We can again call this a template. It just, no, actually don't use the template. Just use the blank file because we're not defining the body tag. So we already have all our stuff. So just say CSS blank file, right? I can just paste my stuff in here. Again, if I go to source format, it's going to line it up nicely for me. Again, save it to the local file system, and again, the convention here is to call this styles.css. I'm going to save that, make sure I'm saving it in the same folder, okay? And then once again, all I have to do is modify my style tag so that it loads that CSS file. It's actually a different tag here. So this is just some of the quirks and vagaries of HTML and CSS and all of these things have evolved over the years. Some things are consistent, some things aren't. So this is actually, it's called link. The tag is called link. And it is link rel. And rel is related, I guess. And so instead of type, we say rel style sheet. We're saying this is a style sheet. And then the same way that we do with an anchor tag, it's an href. It's an href reference is how we choose styles.css. Again, this is just one of those things, and I think this is actually self-closing. Let's find out. Yep, it appears to be self-closing. So part of this, the reason why these aren't as consistent, right? The reason why the way we load, for example, our JavaScript material and our CSS material isn't the same is just because this is some of the earliest stuff that was being done with JavaScript to create styles just on the web to add styles, add interactivity. And so some of it just isn't normalized, right? It's just like any language, these things evolve organically. And so people spell them differently. You get sort of quirky features like this. In any case, the point here is that we can see that now my HTML page is almost entirely HTML. I do have CSS styles being applied. I do have JavaScript interactivity happening, but those things are contained within their own files. They're not cluttering up my HTML file. So I can kind of focus on one thing at a time, which is really great because it means that if I make an error in my JavaScript, it's not going to have a huge side effect on my HTML and vice versa. Okay. So now that we've done this, we're actually going to start working with, and I'm actually going to do one more thing here, which is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove my function calls here. And the reason why is just because I don't really want, I just want to declutter the console. I could also remove the console log statements, but that's kind of all I'm doing with that function at the moment, so I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm just going to not call it, and I've got that function in the bank that I can use when I want to. So I have a nice clean console now, no errors. And so now the question is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do to get a chart on this page? So in the same way that we can use external JavaScript that we wrote, and we can use functions that we wrote, we can use external JavaScript and functions that have been written by other people. And in this case, what we're going to use is the Google Visualization Charts API. Okay, so what this is this is a bunch of code that Google has written that renders interactive charts. And by loading their external JavaScript and using their functions that they wrote, we can create interactive visualizations as well. So we're going to start with just this sort of basic example here, which is a pie chart. So this is something that many of you used actually in your visualization for your redesign assignment. So it's a good example to start with. So what this is showing here is the chart as it is rendered, right? How it's going to behave in the browser once it's rendered. And down here what they have is just the code, and hopefully you'll recognize a lot of pieces of this code, right? We see HTML, we see our head tag. Now, as we discussed, we put things in the head of the HTML page that need to be loaded before other things can happen. And so specifically, we see that there is a script tag here that's loading a bunch of JavaScript, right? gstatic.com chartsloader.js is the location of the JavaScript file that we need to load. And then we have a bunch of regular JavaScript inside this script tag that's going to do some other things. So the reason why we need to make sure to load this before anything else is, well, we want to make sure to load this before anything else because we're going to need to use it. The issue of making sure that all of the data that's on the page that needs to be there is available before we try to manipulate it is something we're going to deal with in a separate piece. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take this entire chunk of code, okay, and I'm going to pop it into my own HTML page. Okay, So I can do that, right? I see now, okay, I have a script tag here. I'm going to go ahead and do a little formatting, right? And this all works just fine. And let's see if I get a chart. So I reload this and oh boy, lots of problems here. JS module 63. Let's see if there's something on line 63 that I can identify. Yeah, line 63 doesn't seem to be anything right here. This is one of the challenges of working with external code, which is that sometimes the errors pop up in places that you literally cannot access. So if I go back to this and I see JS API compiled default module.js, well, I didn't explicitly load anything. I loaded this loader thing, but I didn't load anything by that name, and line 63 isn't even inside my script tags here. This can make debugging this kind of thing a bit challenging, but the key thing here is to go back to our example and see if we've missed anything. So if I look back at the example that was given, I actually noticed that I did miss one important element here, right? So it's looking for, I have to make sure to include a div where the pie chart can appear. Okay, so we've worked mostly with classes up to this point, and the way that we understand using CSS classes is it's a way to group together things that should be styled the same way. Well, likewise, we also often have pieces of a page, for example, a visualization, where we want what appears in that place to be unique. In this case, it's going to be and so when we want it to be unique, we identify it with an ID, right? That's kind of intuitive. An identity is unique. So in this case, we see that they have this div with the ID chart div, and we didn't add that to our page. And if we flip back to our console log here, what we can see is it says container is not defined. So it kind of makes sense a little bit, right? The container, aka the place that the chart should go, hasn't been defined. We haven't given it a place to actually put that visualization that it may have created. So I'm going to come back here, I'm going to slip down into my body tag, and I'm just going to do this right under my headline. I'm going to go ahead and format again here, okay? And let's see how we do. Ta-da! We have an interactive pie chart appearing on our page, right? Now, this is only the beginning, and of course we haven't talked about all of the steps that it took to get here. And so what we'll do when we come back is we're going to go through the Google chart code in detail and talk about what each piece of it is doing, and then how we can start to think about customizing this with our own data, our own color choices, our own titles, etc., to make our own interactive visualizations. So see you in a minute.